Today we have Ree Gilet, who's a lifelong educator, originates from the United States, has lived in Spain for the past 30 some odd years, and has jaunted all over the world for most of her life. 10 years ago, she and her husband, Neil, began going repeatedly to a safari lodge in Zambia. To get to this luxury resort, they had to literally drive by one village after another that were barely subsisting. Ree and Neil later learned that the villagers were struggling for simple survival elements such as clean water, food, and if we want to extend simple human rights, education for the children. Meanwhile, visitors to the resort spent their time photographing animals that were actually the patrimonial property of the people in these villages who received no economic benefits from them. Ree is a teacher. She has no political experience, very little business experience, was not a native of the country, did not know the language of the Zambian villagers in these rural areas, knew no one other than the owners of the resort, and had no idea of even how to take the first step of who to talk to do something as simple as maybe offering money or volunteering. When we're faced with challenges in life, you all know we have two choices. We can find a way to mitigate or overcome the challenge, or we can give up. Two choices, plain and simple. Solving problems is often not so fun. Tugging on doorways that won't open at first, or cluttered with things blocking the way and take forever to clear. But in the end, we see a new horizon. Through these doors, that's magical. Giving up means the door is just closed. We just end up imagining what could be on the other side, but nothing more. So which did Ree choose? Well, she didn't have a lot, but what she had and what she has is passion. She looked for people who knew how to open the door. She looked for people who could clear the path. And so she slid into a whole adventure that she never even imagined. This is how a person whose primary responsibility was planning lessons for her classes, focusing on her two children and her husband, getting groceries, planning book club get-togethers, became a founder of a non-profit organization internationally that is affecting the lives of thousands of villagers, and its reach is limitless, with children in the village who before spent days grinding maize are now graduating from universities and exploring their connections in the world around them on a professional level. How did she do it? Well, Ree's incredibly humble, very soft-spoken, and even so, we had the opportunity recently to connect during one of her rare breaks, and we're going to share that conversation now. Her hope is that you too, if you see something in the world around you that could use an initial push, that you could use some of the elements that worked for her and say to yourself, yes, I can do something. So, are you ready for some direct questions and answers that flesh out the core of Ree's foundation that could very well change your life in the future? Let's go. Ree, so excited that you're here. So excited to talk to you about this. Where we can begin, I'm not even sure, because what you've done is create an initiative that's really incredible. You and your husband have begun it, or did you begin it originally and convinced him?
No. It was the two of us. We spent many years going to Africa. And when you pass people living in poverty to go to a safari lodge and to see their beautiful animals, those poor people never even get to see their own animals. At one point, it's like, that's enough. I can't do this anymore. I can't appreciate this beautiful continent and not help the people that live there.
Could you just tell us some of what you saw when you passed these villages?
When you pass children picking through the garbage for food with hardly any clothes on and with extended bellies, that's poverty. I mean, that's the first image that you get. I mean, then you read about it and you know there's poverty, but when you see it on the street on your way to a beautiful lodge, it's too jarring. Zambia, you could say, the communities in rural Zambia, they live in little huts. They have to walk to get their water. They have no electricity, so they walk to collect firewood, hopefully not cutting down trees, to be able to cook their food. And their food consists mainly of maize that they grind and any vegetables they might grow. And it's a very, very poor combo.
So what did you do? What were the very first steps you took to begin?
I kept saying to my husband, got to do something. And he also was looking at it. He's a businessman, so he's looking at it from his perspective. He works for mergers and acquisitions. So he thought, I'd like to tie this in to my company that's called Livingston, coincidentally. And he found a very small local organization that took funds from the safari lodges in a small rural community and pour them into the community, building schools. So that was the first thing we looked at. It was to build the school and have Livingston Partners, international company, fund the building of the school. And being a teacher, I said, well, you can't just build the school. A school isn't four walls. So I would like to continue supporting the school, as long as we can, as long as it needs our support. And I connected it to the American School of Valencia to try to create a pen pal system going on, which is very difficult because you can't send things there, but we can take them back and forth.
Was there any educational system before you became involved? What did they have and what was lacking?
Years the children were sitting, they sit under a tree. Someone would find a big blackboard and they would actually write the words. And then when we built the school, there wasn't enough furniture. So most of the classrooms, they were sitting on the floor. Teacher says, I want you to copy this from the board, because they did have old boards that they would write on. So you need materials, you need furniture, and you need teachers.
Ree, you were committed to being the initial push, and the intention was always not to go in as the Western saviors of civilization, but rather financial support so they could become empowered and take over all the work themselves and moving ahead. And one of the challenges you told me a while ago was finding teachers in the area, because there weren't either any or many. But the option of you teaching or bringing in teachers from outside the country was also not appropriate, according to your mission statement of letting them become self-sustaining. So this also has to do with the population distribution, and that's something else someone who's thinking of beginning an initiative needs to take into account, right? So could you explain that a little bit, please?
So the population in Zambia is like a triangle. At the very top, there are a very small percentage of older people. The median age is 16 years old. The 50% of the population is under 18. So teachers don't tend to be teenagers. They tend to be experienced people, adults with teaching certificates. So in our school of 500 students, almost 600 students, we have 2 certified teachers because of the population. And the other remaining 5 teachers are high school graduates that are sort of trained to teach the students. So we support them as best we can in the situation that Zambia has.
Now, you were in a very privileged position in that your husband had a business and he had the inclination to use his business to begin funding the project. But what's also critical that people have to understand is that you found local organizations who had limited, very limited funds, but what they did have were all the necessary legal resources, and so they could begin doing all the administrative and political machinations once you helped more money start coming in, right?
My husband found Project Luangwa, which is in the Luangwa Valley, which is a small charity that gets their funding from the safari lodges. So that's a very local organization that only works in that area. So then we found they don't have enough funding to build a school. That's a lot of money. So he found the funding from his company, from his partners, and they agreed to build the first school that we worked. So that was the beginning, building of Kapita School in the Luangwa Valley. We started off with 180 students, and now they're about 500.
And again, it was critical that you were working with local organizations and letting go of any Western perspective, as well-intentioned as it might be, of going in and imposing your vision on them, but rather supporting them in any way you could so they could mobilize and create their own vision, right?
We did it all through local organizations. So it was Project Luangwa, who are fabulous. And they had built 20 schools. We would never do anything ourselves. We don't live there. We don't know the culture or the society there. So we work with local organizations who know the people who live side by side with them. So they were the ones that built the school. They were the ones that find the teachers. And the head teacher who actually came to Valencia, he also finds teachers to help him at the school.
In having this kind of fluid working relationship, you even needed to let go of your preferences of languages used in the school, isn't that right? And as a teacher with an enormous amount of experience in plurilingual learning, that's not very comfortable, is it? Knowing that perhaps they could do it differently?
They teach, this is interesting since you and I both worked at a bilingual school. For many years, Zambia was Northern Rhodesia. So the language was English from the English, that was the English colony. When they got their independence in the 60s, they began to foment their local languages. So English is still the common language for the whole country. So they do teach English in the schools, and they used to teach English until maybe 10 years ago or 8 years ago. They used to teach English as we did the American school from the age of 3. Then they decided, no, we need them to know their own language. So they teach in their their language, which is Bemba or Nyenja or whatever the local language is, and they don't teach English until fifth grade. And then suddenly in fifth grade, they're teaching science, math. Suddenly they flip and they start teaching it in English. And we can't really say too much. This is their decision. Like, this is a government decision.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's one of these topics that you think, well, should we get rid of the English altogether and let them go back to their main language, which I think there are 40 languages in Zambia, which is quite a lot of languages. So are you helping the country move forward? Are you helping them backward? I don't know. So I think, if their language that they're going to be teaching in as the subjects get harder is in English, of course you don't want to lose the local language. You don't want to lose the local dialect or language. But at the same time, you don't want them to lose education because there's more materials in English and they've got more future in English. I think it's a give and take. It's a hard question to answer right away.
So here's the key, Ree. When things got difficult, how do you keep going?
I think when you're passionate, I think people tap into your passion. And a lot of my friends have said, you're just so passionate about what's happening there in Zambia and what the projects that you're working on. And it is passion. It's because you see, when we first went to the village, they had a few chickens maybe. Now when we go back, they have goats. By supporting education, we're not just supporting the little kids in their school, we're supporting a whole community. And it's wonderful to see that progress through education. And when we started, these are not things that we've invented. This is the projects that are doing them there. And we're so inspired by what they do that we find funding for them because they're so busy doing their work. There's no way they could fund themselves. So I think in a way, that's our job, is to go out and support them by spreading the word a bit of what they're doing in these small villages to help these people develop as communities.
And your foundation is much more extensive now. You've gone further than just thinking about primary and secondary education, haven't you?
We also support a vocational training school. And I think you might have read about that, where because they finish their schooling, and if they don't have any skills, they can't really, and if they've grown up in a little hut with no electricity and no running water, they wouldn't understand how to be an electrician or how to. So it's a vocational training school. It's actually a Catholic mission, and they train students in carpentry, auto mechanics, all kinds of things that are really practical that they would learn otherwise.
What are some of the other impacts from the activity you've initiated with your foundation? And once the children leave the villages to study, do they come back?
They might, or they could go to safari lodges. And because of the safari lodges, the road from that tiny little airport out to the lodges has become quite busy with little shops that have been set up, and hairdressers and bicycle shops. So that, very rustic, but the community is growing and developing. So the ones that have learned things would probably stay there. But not all of our students go to the vocational training. Some of them go on to university. Some of them get to 7th grade and can't go on to secondary school because it's not public. It's not paid for by the government. So their parents have to pay. If you're a subsistence farmer, you really don't have any income. So at the age of however old they are when they reach grade 7, which could be 15, 16, 18, they have to stay home and keep grinding maize and planting the corn every year.
What's one of your underlying hopes for these children?
So what you're hoping is that the students will begin to get educated and have an opportunity. Because I did once ask my husband, wouldn't it be better if we just left them alone and let them do what they're doing? And, why are we getting involved? And he said, well, with education, you have a choice. Without education, you don't have a choice. So in a way, you're giving them a choice. And I think it's so true. We forget that we all had a choice. We all are able to choose if we're going to travel here or there or study here or there. If we don't give them a little support, they don't have that choice.
What impacts have you seen on gender equality in the schools since you've become involved? And again, how do you tread that fine line between caring about what happens to the children and imposing your own cultural perspectives on them?
Okay, so this is not something that I would decide what to do, because I am an American living in Europe. I have no clue to what their lives are like. I know I've been told things about how actually, I looked it up. 60% of women, 50% of men think that women are inferior. 60% of women, 64% of women think that they're inferior. So, I mean, they're their own worst enemy. But we work with a wonderful woman called Fuilane. She's actually gone to the UN, but she works to speak about the groups that she does. She has like which calls clubs, girls clubs and boys clubs, because you can't work with the girls if you're not working with the boys. You have to also educate them that girls are not your inferior and they're not meant to be, they're not like cattle, you don't hit them. So in the beginning, you could see the boys saying, yeah, when I started, I thought girls were just not as intelligent as we are. And so there's a change going on within them as well as within the girls. And she is from the next town over. She grew up, she's local, and yet she's part of this whole gender education going on in Africa. They call themselves the aunties because they're the older women. She's probably in her 20s, maybe 30s. And she works with these young teenagers, girls, and it's wonderful to see her working with them. She's got so much fantastic energy. And she brings out because she's one of them. She brings out some of their issues at home. If they see their mother get beaten, or if they get approached by an uncle and they don't want to have anything to do with that uncle. So she's lived these experiences or seen them in her village. So working with local people, I think, is one of the best ways to help out, rather than coming in as with our knowledge for our culture. It's very different than what their needs are.
How's your vision working with these villagers through the foundation changed and maybe even moved forward over the past 10 years?
So we started off with education only. And we've decided, rather than expand to other areas of Africa, we'll stay in that area because we go once or twice a year. We know the people and we can check up on, see how they're doing, not to see if they're doing a good job, but just to see what their progress is and talk with them and see what their difficulties are. So we've stayed regional. We stayed in the same area. We started with education, then we moved on to this Chikoa, which is the vocational training school. Then we found out about a wildlife trust, which teaches the local people about the local animals. Many of these tiny villages have never been to this amazing national park, which is filmed with BBC and some of the Planet Earth, or one of these documentaries. It's one of the most amazing national parks we've ever been to. And they live maybe 10 kilometers away, 20 kilometers away. And their only knowledge of these animals is when the dry season comes, the river dries up, the elephants cross over, the lions would cross over, all the animals begin to cross over into these tiny little villages and wreck their plantations and create a bit of havoc. So that's their relationship with the animals. So this organization, it was actually started 25 years ago by 2 retired police officers from the UK who loved this area. But now, as in these other organizations, it's beginning to be run more by local people. And one of their girls, because these stories are good, one of the girls that went through their program went on to the capital, Lusaka, to study wild animals and to study wildlife. Then she got a full scholarship to go to the States to study wild cats. And now she's gone back and is training local people about protecting their animals. So we're beginning to see some of these students who have gone from zero, from the tiny village to making their gruel every morning, to then going back to the villages. Not all of them do, but some of them do go back, and they bring some knowledge and skills that are helping the community to develop.
What are some of the other key issues that your foundation has worked on in the past 10 years that don't directly connect to education, but turns out are absolutely essential?
We put a water tank at the school because every year it gets drier and drier and drier. There's no rain for 6 months and it gets a bit scary. And then suddenly the skies open and it's a deluge it's just waters, rain falling from the sky. And it runs off, we see it happen sometimes here in Valencia too. When it's been so dry, the rains come down, the earth isn't ready to collect the water to absorb it, and the water runs off. And I was communicating with one of our sponsored students who was 17 or 18, finished secondary school, and was teaching at our school for a year until he got into his engineering course. And I said, Boyd, what's going on? He said, I'm so bored. I said, well, why don't you find a solution for this water that comes down from the sky every year? What can we do about it? He said, well, just a minute, I'll draw a picture. And he drew a picture of a tank and the roof and a little gutter coming off of the roof and into the tank. I said, fantastic. And I took it to the people that we work with to build the wells in either even more remote areas. And they had not wanted to help this area. They said, there's no water in the region where you have Capita School. We're not going to dig another well because there's no aquifer underneath. And I said, well, what about collecting the rainwater? They do this in Kenya. They do this all. And they said, okay, well, we'll put it in. But it was all based on this little picture by this young boy who said, let's put this in. And I said to this company. I said, well, will that expand out to other villages? Do you think they might want to put a water tank in to collect the water from the school rooftops? She said, well, they're not a proud people. They don't want to, and this is really interesting because this is where culture steps in. They don't want to stick out as if they're a know-it-all and show others what they know how to do. I thought, wow, well, that's kind of hard to advance if you're that modest, you know? So it's all a learning process for all of us, isn't it?
And the website for your foundation also addresses very specifically the issue of menstruation for a very important reason. And it's an issue for the boys and the girls, isn't it? The girls in these villages were not able to leave their house 1 week out of a month because they were menstruating and didn't have sanitary towels. Can you tell us a little bit about this part of the initiative? Because it's fascinating.
Yeah, I would say they can leave the house, but if they don't have any type of sanitary pad, they can't go to school because they'll be bleeding all over. So just to say it as it is, at the age of 12, 13, they might be in a class of 80, 90 students with a teacher, as I said, who might be a high school graduate, teaching them math and science. So they get their period and they can't go for 5 or 6. That's 25% of the time of the class. So that's, it's 1 week of the month. If you miss a week, especially in math, where it's, you keep progressing through the skills that you learn, they miss a week, 80, 90 kids, the teacher cannot help them to catch up to the rest of the class. And after a few months of that, they drop out. And then they are back in the village grinding the maize. So giving the ufulu pads, they call them, they're sanitary pads made from bamboo, gives them the chance to continue their education. It's something so simple. And they talk about it in the girls and boys clubs. They have menstruation day. They have one day where they all celebrate women's menstruation, without which we wouldn't have children. So it's a big thing. And the boys talk about it and the girls talk about it. So they've gone from something that was totally taboo in their culture also to talk about. And they talk about it because it's giving women the chance, or young girls the chance, to continue their education.
And these ufulu pads are also ecological. Can you tell us a little bit more of the design? Because it's brilliant and it also respects the culture.
Yeah, they're washable. They're made from bamboo and they're washable. They get a packet. So we collect funds for them to have the fulu pads because they can't afford to buy them. And the fulu pads are made at Project Luangwa, one of the organizations we work with. They have a sewing area in the back office. They have about 5 or 6 old machines. And the women from the villages make the fulu pads for the young girls, which I think is wonderful because they're helping them out. They're washable, but then you can't hang the pads up for all to see. So they're sold with little cloth bags that they hang them inside of to dry so that they're not visual, that you can't see them.
Do you see more girls continuing their studies because of this ostensibly simple but really fundamental part of these girls' lives?
Yes, I think so. I think that when we go back, there are more and more girls attending. Unfortunately, every once in a while, a young one will get pregnant, and that's the end of her schooling. And it's kind of sad, but they are staying, and we're finding more and more girls are being supported because we have the scholarship program. That's one of the things that we try so hard every year. Their school year starts in January. And we find out in January, they finish in December, they do all their end of year tests, and they get accepted into high schools in the area. If they're really good, unfortunately, they have to go further away because the further away, the better the school. So some of these kids are accepted into high schools, but they can't go because they don't have the funding. So that's what we do every year. We look for families to fund them for 5 years for the 5-year course of high school so that they can continue. And it used to be mostly boys, and now there are more and more girls. So that's really exciting to see the girls continuing their education.
When I first heard about you beginning this foundation, Ree, I thought that you were regularly teaching in the school, but that's one more area that we need to be aware is not necessarily respectful to the culture that we Westerners just assume we should go in and teach. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The first time I went with another teacher from school, and it was wonderful because we did some English classes for the students. The next year, we got a message from the government saying, if you would like to teach in our school, you need to have police records on all these things that we would ask in our schools also. And I thought, fair enough. We wouldn't just have some teacher come into our classroom and teach our kids from another school that we didn't know. So I thought, they're right. They're right to put these things in place. So we actually applied. So my husband and I went one year and we did some English classes, enacting a shopkeeper and the shopper and asking how much is that? How much is that? So we did all the paperwork. We got accepted. And we were allowed to do 3 or 4 days of classes. So that was fun. But we don't really do that because it's, once again, here I am. I know everything. I'm coming in to show you how to do things. And that's not what we want. We want to support them in their dreams and their endeavors and their hard work. So I will go with people. We go with the people that are interested in the project. We visit the projects. We could help out planting trees but we wouldn't step in and take over a teacher's place during the day because it's their class. And we have to be very respectful of their ways of teaching, of their ways of working.
What would you say to someone who wants to go and volunteer in a situation like this, in a country like this?
I always thought, no, I want to volunteer, I want to do work. But I realized I'm from a totally different culture. I can go meet them, I can speak with them, I can ask them questions, they can show me what they're doing, I can support what they're doing, but I can't step in and try to show them how to do things because I don't know. I don't live in the Zambian savannah, which is why volunteering is a touchy subject. I always thought it's this whole, and I'm learning this, that volunteering is lovely. It makes you feel really good and the kids love it. And when I was there with our friend, the families were saying, don't go near the school because those Mzungu, which are the white people are there teaching our children. Don't bother them, don't interrupt. And I think, no, that's not what it's about. It's about them learning and giving the knowledge back to their villages, what they've learned, not from us.
All right, so let's get into funding. What resources does your foundation have? And what could you say to someone else who would like to create a foundation like yours?
We're very small, although you say we're very big, but we don't get loads of money in. We don't have government funding. We don't have any of that. We have individuals or companies that fund. We have 2 companies that each of them pays for 1 well every year. And these are wells with hand pumps, manual pumps. They're called boreholes. And these are very remote villages. So that's what some people do. They cost $6,500 to put in a borehole. And the people that do this have been, the man that owns the company used to have a safari lodge. He was born and raised in Zambia. He's a white Zambian. His father was one of the first ones that they were hunting safaris back in the 50s, but now they're photographic safaris. So he speaks with the locals and he goes into the villages and he said, where do you have to go for water? And I've been to the villages and they show you how far they have to walk for water. So I think what we're very direct, we're very hands-on. We're not hands-on, but we're very in touch with what's going on there. And as far as administrative costs, pretty much zero. My work's volunteer. Neil has the people in his office. When they're not doing all their meetings, they're typing up letters to our sponsors or to other people. So it's all volunteers.
What are other ways people could contribute to your foundation, for instance, or foundations like yours?
There's a woman, you might remember, the Mink family. There were 3 Dutch boys. Elizabeth is a painter, and she's turning her paintings into silk, but they're not silk. They're made with recycled plastic bottles, but they feel like silk, scarves, and she sells them. And the money that she raises is for the Ufulu pads. So we have a Dutch woman raising funds, sending the funds through our organization here in Spain, and then it goes directly to Project Longwa, to the Ufulu pads. She's helped, I think, at this stage, 8-10 girls to have Ufulu pads. It means that they continue for another 2 years at school. So, it's very personal, it's very small.
What is one of your deepest wishes for the foundation?
To continue with its full steam ahead, because you see so many organizations be born and die within a year or two, and we're coming up to our 10th year. So I think that's pretty good. And, we have to look at the future. How is this going to continue? We've took some American friends who are also on the board. We have an organization in the States. It's the same one, Livingston Foundation. And the 2 couples that came with us have pledged 5 years going ahead to give very sizable sums of money, both of those couples. And the change is that they're going to each do a well plus 2 other things every year. So that's exciting. But I think they were on an African tour and they came first with us and then they saw Botswana and South Africa. But the down-to-earth connecting with the local people and seeing these projects and how they're changing lives, I think it's very inspiring when you see it firsthand.
All right, and one last part of the foundation for the time being that we want to talk about deals with the basic subsistence of living. And we're talking about clean water, and not just about putting in wells, for instance, but setting up the dynamics so the villagers are in charge of the wells and the villagers are in charge of maintaining the clean water, not the very well-intentioned foreigners. Can you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, no, the water situation. These little villages, their water situations, they collect it from the river during the rainy season. And as the river dries up, they have to walk further and further. We went to one of these villages and we walked, I don't know how far it was, maybe half a kilometer, but it was quite far. They were hand dug holes and they put their pot in and collected the water from there. And we walked back to the village. And, they usually carry it on their heads. The children carry it on their heads. And one of these moments that you think, wow, we were talking with them, they were speaking with the villagers, and there was a woman holding a baby on her back, and a little child was holding her dress, her skirts. And the child pulled on her skirt, and this is the water just collected from this filthy hole. And he wanted water, and she just had him drink from there. And of course, these kids die of diarrhea, whatever is in this water. It's terrible. And these children die, babies die from this water. So how can you can't educate people when they can't have health and they can't have healthy lives. So, the basics, and then it's up to them. But you give them water, you give them education. We don't give it to them, but you support it so that they can have water and education. And what's wonderful about these wells that are put in, this company that puts the wells in, they're also a charity now. They meet with the elders of the village and they create a committee. So the committee has to take charge of that well once it's in. You don't just go and put the well in and say, okay, there you go, enjoy your well. They have to keep it clean. They plant a little garden that takes the runoff water so that they use all the water, so that it's not just going and throwing money at them and giving them stuff. It's a continual process of working with them and helping them to develop care for their well.
All right, so passion, and more passion has fueled this entire enterprise, but there's also the administrative side, as we all know, or really ought to know. So what was the biggest challenge that you had that someone who wants to start up an initiative like this needs to know, and it's essential?
I think that maybe the legal side, getting everything set up. We needed a lawyer to help us because to become a foundation here, you have to go through all the paperwork and luckily we have wonderful accountants and lawyers that help out because they work for my husband's company already. On the side, they help us do this, so that doesn't cost much money either. So, but having all the bureaucracy, that can be hard, and it's frustrating because sometimes you try to send materials, but we've learned that it's better to buy the materials there because you're supporting local commerce. If you send people, oh, take this, take that, which is great, but it's better if they have their own materials. One year we raised funds for the American school for school uniforms, and people were saying, well, you could ship them. We could ship our old uniforms, or we could ship this. But the woman that ran the organization then, she's very clever. She said, no, I'm going to the local seamstress or tailor, and he's going to make all the uniforms. It was a bit cumbersome to do the whole thing, but it was wonderful because it was supporting local commerce. Oh, they're so proud of their uniforms. It's something that we don't believe in or think we should or should not have uniforms, but they wore those uniforms with such pride. It means they go to school and they're so happy to go to school. It's so important for them. It changes their lives. It totally changes their lives. They're not left at home to have babies and plant on the farm still. They're given a chance to go somewhere else, meet kids from other villages, because that's what it is. It's like a boarding school. They meet kids from other villages. They learn. They have the chance to move on in life or go back. It's their choice now.
I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to share your experiences, Ree. And hopefully, at least one, if not more of our listeners is going to be not only inspired, but really informed about how she can begin an initiative like yours. And so thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Donna.
So that is our talk with a woman you would pass on the street every day and not know the millions of incredible sparks of inspiration that's going on in her head. You might look more closely and see her confidence and her deep compassion for you as another human being on the earth, and how she sees children thousands of miles away and always thinking about what she can do to make options in their lives even broader. So you can peep through more doorways to hear absolutely fascinating conversations like this on Doorways to Learning with Donna, and activities that you can download and use to encourage students to assimilate new information at scaffoldingmagic.com. In the meantime, have fun in your classes and at home, and see you next week for another doorway that we're going to look through to see spectacular educational journeys.